Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis, a breaking news reporter here at Forbes. Joining me now is Republican strategist and executive director of Principles First, Brittany Martinez. Brittany, thanks so much for coming back on.
Thanks for having me.
Brittany, I want to talk today about arguably the first biggest staffing scandal in President Trump's second term, and that is Signalgate. So just to recap the story, The Atlantic's editor-in-chief, Jeffrey Goldberg, said that he was inadvertently added to a group chat with the nation's top security leaders when they were discussing an impending U.S. airstrike on the Houthis in Yemen. So to start off the conversation, what is your reaction to this story and then the subsequent fallout?
I think this is so ridiculous. How did this happen? There are so many smart people on this chat. I can understand if, someone maybe had put the wrong Jeff on a chat, right? And maybe someone else not realizing because it was a number that didn't appear obvious to them. But how do you do that? There were 19 people on this chat. No one caught that. And thank God it was not only a reporter, like reporting is a great thing, but like it was only a reporter and not some sort of spy or something really bad. That could have been terrible, and they're making it seem like it's not a big deal, and it is, and they're being very flippant about it and not really taking ownership and accountability. And so I just have so many thoughts on Signalgate, all of them bad, and I can't believe that this just happened.
And I think that's what a lot of people are saying. Like, thank God this was an American. Thank God he revealed the text after and not before the attack happened. Thank God it wasn't one of our enemies. So I want to talk about what exactly the issue is here, or what's the biggest issue, because there's a lot of different factors here. Is it that Jeffrey Goldberg, a journalist, was seemingly inadvertently added to the chat? Is it that Signal itself was being used? Is it that Michael Waltz seemingly somehow had Jeffrey Goldberg's number on his phone, and for what purpose he did have a journalist's number on his phone? Or that the nation's top security leaders were talking about these plans in an app and not a skiff, which, as we know, is a very highly classified room. You go in, you don't even bring your phone.
I think all these things are a big deal. Minus having a reporter's number. I mean, members of Congress and electeds all the time, will be in communication with reporters, and that's normal. That's just how the business works. I don't think that's a big deal. But I think the other three things you mentioned are a huge deal. Why are we using Signal app? It's 2025. Like, I'd use Signal in a professional setting as well, but I'm not discussing government secrets. I'm asking my colleagues, like, hey, I'm going to go to lunch. Does anybody want to come with me? Do you want me to bring you back a salad or a sweet drink? I'm not giving airstrike times and those sorts of things, which is absolutely ridiculous that these things are being discussed. Like, yes, it should have been in the skit. They shouldn't have been able to discuss some of these things in Signal. And the fact that they're relying on Signal, I was just talking to someone, and look, when you work for Congress, for example, you use Microsoft. That is what we use. We use that for email, and you use Microsoft Teams. We've also adopted Zoom Gov in a lot of capacities, but it's the Gov version, right? Maybe we make a Signal Gov. I think that Elon Musk has no business being around the administration and doing all the things he is with Doge. However, maybe we can lean into him with his expertise and innovation and say, like, hey, can we create a public-private partnership for a Signal Gov app or something similar? It is crazy that this is what happened, and we should be concerned. And as I said, the administration is doubling down when really what they should have done is said, we made a mistake, own it, and tell American people how you're going to make sure that it happens. And I haven't really seen a lot of accountability, and they're trying to, pretend it's not a big deal, but it is.
Let's talk about that accountability or lack thereof, because the National Security Advisor, Michael Waltz, he didn't blame it on a staffer when he was in an interview with Laura Ingraham on Fox News. He said, I created the chat, but somehow Jeffrey Goldberg's number got sucked in. Those were his words. And I'm not a technology expert at all. If something's not working, I just shut it off and then back on. And if it doesn't go past that, I don't really have a solution. But I do use Signal, and never in my experience with Signal has a number inadvertently been sucked into a group chat. I talked with a cybersecurity expert. She said that really doesn't happen. So what do you think of his interview, his response, his account of what happened?
I mean, I'm actually not sure how old Waltz is. So when I say boomer, he might not literally be a boomer, but honestly, maybe it's helpful boomer talk to say, it just got sucked in, because as we know, as people use the app, that's not how it works. And that's generally not how texting somebody works. You don't get sucked in. You accidentally put the wrong number, right? Which is clearly what happened in this case. I don't know what sucked in means. I don't think he knows what it means. I don't truly, what I imagine happened, which seems to be what was earlier discussed, that a staffer accidentally put the wrong person on there. I will give him credit for not blaming a staffer and throwing them under the bus, it seems so far, and for, I guess, owning that part of it. But yeah, I don't really know what sucked in means. That's not like a thing.
And then I want to talk about the other piece of this, because there's a popular phrase, it's not the crime, it's the cover up. And the things that were talked about in this Signal chat, I mean, there are arguments whether there any laws were broken here. But at first, after it was leaked on Monday, then it was people saying in the administration, Pete Hegseth especially, nothing was classified. We didn't talk about war plans, and he was trying to discredit the journalist Jeffrey Goldberg. Then when it essentially egged the Atlantic on to release the exact texts, which were released. They said exactly the temperature, where this was. I mean, they were very detailed. And then it was said, hey, see, we were right. They're not war plans, they're attack plans. What do you make of that whole fallout?
I think that's really lame. And I think that they're taking no accountability for it, whether it's a war plan or attack plan, or people use those terms synonymously, right? There was information that should not have been put in a Signal in a Signal app or any sort of format that is not a SCIF or very classified or very safe to do. And they shared information that they should have. So, okay, if it's not a big deal, if that wasn't such a big deal, would it have been a big deal if they had put that up on the White House website? I think that would have been a big deal, right? If they'd accidentally put it up on the website, or if they decided intentionally to press send on a press release that had all those details, that would have been an issue. They would have said that shouldn't have been on the press release, on the website. Maybe they think because it was a private conversation with people that it was something that was okay to share. But again, they rather than point to the Atlantic and it's them flip-flopping on the terminology, and even they disagree with what they even printed, just own it. And you're right, I think that's what's upsetting me as an American. People make it seem, because if there was a Democrat, Republicans would be up in arms about this situation, yet a lot of people are saying it's not a big deal. It is a big deal, and we shouldn't be hypocritical just because there's an R next to their names, Robert.
And it gave the story more legs, because if there was more accountability, the Atlantic wouldn't feel the need to have released those text messages. And when you admit something in general in life, it stops a story in the tracks. I think the best version of how this could have went for Mike Waltz, if he just said, hey, this was my mistake, it won't happen again, but what we really should be talking about is how successful this strike was, redirected the conversation that way. Do you think, because of what happened, the mistake that was seemingly made and the subsequent fallout, what do you think needs to happen here? Because President Trump earlier this week apparently told NBC News, Michael Waltz learned his lesson. He's a good man. I mean, does someone have to get fired for this? What do you think?
I mean, I think that Americans might want someone to have to take accountability in that way, whether that's being fired. I don't know that you can put them on some sort of probationary period, right? I mean, it's the first few months anyway, so in theory, they're kind of in a probationary period anyway. Look, I don't think Waltz is a bad guy. He's spent a long time in Congress. He is a veteran. I think that he's probably one of the most qualified folks of the administration, as next to Senator Rubio, who actually done the thing that they're been tasked to do. People do make mistakes. We're humans. We're not perfect. I think that had they done what you suggested, it would still be a story, but a week from now, it probably wouldn't be as big of a story. We're going to continue talking about it, I think, for the foreseeable future. Just own it. At this moment, I would give the White House that same piece of advice, even if it is a few days late, to just own it. And I know I've said that 10 times probably already during this conversation, but tell them to people how you're going to ensure it's never going to happen again. And this is why. And because we now have come to the realization that a lot of people are using these apps, like members of Congress and senators, etc., that we are in the process of starting some new sort of app, bringing in Elon Musk or whoever else, ensure that we're able to talk about classified things in this manner. Is that possible? I don't know, because our adversaries are always watching us. There was concerns that the Chinese were already after JD Vance and his devices. And so when he is, when there's already that such situation happening when Lutnick is in Russia, right? These are concerns that we really do need to take seriously. Thank God it was a journalist. Thank God nothing bad happened. But what if it had? It would be a lot bigger of a story. We got lucky. It's not because they were strategic about it.
And we know when it came out that Hillary Clinton was using a private email server, I mean, that was a story that didn't die for months and months, and Republicans were up in arms over that. Do you think because of this lack of full accountability here, this almost passing the buck of insulting Jeffrey Goldberg, saying other things, do you think that Republicans here are losing trust? And then how do they gain that? Because as we know, I mean, usually weekends are slower news days. This is going to be probably the leading story on every Sunday news show. I mean, where do Republicans go from here, and how do they regain that trust?
Honestly, I really think that it's incumbent upon Democrats in this situation to sort of do what Republicans did with Hillary, lock her up and all of that stuff. Maybe you don't need to be using that inflammatory language, but to really hold them accountable, because guess what? It worked for Republicans back in 2016. This is something that they can use for themselves to work now. As far as Republicans and regaining trust, my advice to members of Congress or senators who are just sort of sitting and watching and seeing how this all unfolds is to be really honest about the situation. I saw Patrick McHenry, who's no longer a sitting member, but former Speaker Pro Temp McHenry say yesterday on the news, he was like, they just need to be able to take responsibility and say, this is how we're going to make sure we move forward so it never happens again. I think that's what all Republicans need to be saying moving forward. Whether the administration does it or not, we'll see what happens. I think we're probably more likely not, because they already decided not to go down that path. But yes, I think we can't be hypocrites about the situation, because if the roles were reversed, we would be very upset about what's happening, and we would be calling for someone to resign.
I do now want to switch gears just a little bit and talk about Elise Stefanik. President Trump nominated her for UN ambassador. He then on Thursday pulled that nomination, citing the razor-thin majority, the GOP majority in the House. What are your thoughts on what happened?
Well, I do feel really bad for Elise Stefanik. She was the youngest woman to ever be elected to Congress at her time. I really looked up to her. She was a member of the Tuesday group. She was moderate. And then all of a sudden, when it was impeachment stuff, that's when she started to be lockstep with Trump. And I think she saw the potential there to sort of carve a lane out for herself. I'll be honest, I think that she bet on the wrong horse, which is Trump. I think she should have been betting on herself, because she was already a rising star. She'll continue to be a rising star. But what we see is unfortunate. When she was, going on her way to going to the UN, the way, but from my understanding, is that you're only allowed to take 2 staff with you. That means all of her other staff that was part of her conference leadership team, they've already dispersed to other offices, right? And so what, she's now going to have to rebuild her team. She is not going to be in a leadership position. They might give her like a fun de facto assistant speaker gig or something like that, but not an actual true leadership position or a committee or something like that, because those have already been decided. It's a tough spot to be in. If I was her, I wouldn't be too happy. Another thing that's really interesting, though, to consider here when we're talking about the members in the House is that sadly 2 Democrat House members died in March. And so though we are talking about slim margins here, the margins are actually a little bit bigger now than they were even 2 months ago when they were officially sworn in. So if I was Elise, I wouldn't be that enthused about what's going on. I'm sure there have been lots of conversations. Maybe they're trying to promise her a gig later on down the line when the margins are a little safer. The other thing to think about as well is that this race, if she's to run again, is supposed to be a tougher race in her district than it has been the last few cycles. And so that also puts her in a really tough position too. And I still think she's got a bright future ahead of her. She's only 40 years old, but wow, what a story. It's terrible.
And yeah, let's talk about what that future really looks like, because she had her sights on leaving and going into the Trump administration. I mean, if you look at her Instagram, it is a highlight reel of all of her, congressional best hits, because she thought she was out of there. Like you said, she gave up her leadership position to Lisa McClain now has that. She was a rising star. She was very moderate. She's from New York. Now, as you said, she's in lockstep with President Trump. And it seems like not her political career was cut at its knees, but it went from becoming UN ambassador. We know Nikki Haley was UN ambassador. She ran for president. I mean, what does this do for her political future?
I think she'll be okay. Ultimately, I might be rough these next 6 months or the rest of the year trying to figure out what lane she does belong in. I'm sure she'll still continue to, be very supportive of the administration and President Trump and Vice President Vance, and do her best to sort of continue that highlight reel and show folks like, hey, I'm not on the team, but like I'm still on the team, And I'm sure they'll try to find a spot for her. If I was her, I would be needling them like every week, like, hey, just wanted to follow up on that promise that you made me, which maybe there wasn't one, right? I assume, though, it's politics. There's always conversations. Doesn't mean it has to be bad, but there's always conversations happening of like how you can help each other. So if I was her, I would be constantly following up, like, being a good sport, being a team player. But being a team player in this case didn't help her. So I don't know. I think she'll ultimately be okay, but I would be incredibly frustrated if I was her.
And this news took a lot of people by surprise. And I want to talk about Democrats' reaction. Here's what Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries said, quote, "The Republican agenda is extremely unpopular. They are crashing the economy in real time, and House Republicans are running scared. What happened to their so-called mandate?" I mean, what do you think? Do you think he has a point? Does this look like Republicans are running scared? Because President Trump didn't sugarcoat it. He said the reason he's pulling her is because of the the GOP's slim majority in the House.
I also find it really ironic that now all of a sudden he cares about the majority in the House when so far he's just been signing a lot of executive orders which ultimately don't have long-staying power for actually eliciting change long-term into law. So maybe he's changing his tune now because he realizes, okay, it's been a few months. I've really actually got to start doing work and not just sign these pieces of paper that don't actually do anything. But yeah, he's right. I mean, it is a slim majority. It was always going to be a slim majority. I don't quite know what that number is now, given the two members of Congress who did pass away this March. But yeah, if I were him, I guess it doesn't really signal strength in doing that. And I'm sure that hers was last because they were always looking to see, what does this look like? What are the special elections coming up? Will Republicans win? Are we going to potentially lose? And I don't know that this has ever happened before, but within the Congress from one side to the other, like that would be crazy. And obviously anyone in power would want to avoid that. It'd be really interesting to see, I'll be honest. But of course they're not going to want to do that. They want to do their best to make sure that doesn't happen. And so if that means pulling her nomination, so be it. I think it'll be interesting to see who they put into that role, if they're still having conversations or figuring that out. But I can't imagine that this mandate it's not doing so hot so far. And I think it is a testament to that. You know what? Yes, he did win. It wasn't by overwhelming margins. So it's really not the mandate after all.
And to that point, is there anyone you would want to see replace Elise Stefanik as UN ambassador nominee and eventually be confirmed?
Nikki Haley again. No, I don't think she would ever do it. And at this point, I don't think the administration, maybe they had wanted her to join the admin. Maybe not now, who knows? But not really. I think maybe a former senator or member of Congress who's no longer in office and has retired. I love Patrick McHenry. I don't think he would do it, but he was in Congress for a few decades and is very diplomatic. I think he could be a great get for them. I think he's probably happy not associating with Congress and the admin and doing his. That's my opinion. I don't know.
Well, Brittany Martinez, per usual, I love getting your input. Thank you so much for joining me. You are welcome back anytime.
Thanks for having me.